Red Bull just showed the world their new car for 2026. But what they didn't say is exactly what's making the other teams nervous. Because behind closed doors, engineers from Mercedes and Ferrari are pushing for an emergency clarification. Why? Because what Red Bull just unveiled might not just be clever, it might be redefining the gray zone. Some insiders even claim Red Bull could be gaining up to 4/10 per lap. And if that's true, the entire 2026 balance of power is already broken. But the most concerning part is that the FIA already knows and isn't doing anything. And that leads us to something much more serious. January 15th, 2026. Central Station, Detroit. Red Bull didn't just pick this place for aesthetics. They chose it for symbolism. This wasn't Europe. This wasn't Milton Keynes. This was Ford's backyard. In front of 1,500 carefully selected guests, Red Bull Racing presented what looked like a new era. A brand new livery. Lighter blue, brighter finish, a glossy skin that instantly broke away from the matte designs of the last decade. The message was clear. This is something different. But that wasn't the real story, because what stood on stage wasn't a racing car. It was a model, a visual placeholder. The actual RB22, the one that will compete in 2026, wasn't even there. It never left the factory. That might sound like a detail, but in Formula One, nothing is shown unless it's calculated. And hiding the real car, while presenting a symbolic one, signals a level of secrecy that Red Bull hasn't used in years. Why now? Because Red Bull isn't just changing cars. They're changing identities. For the first time in their history, they're no longer using someone else's engine. No Honda, no Renault, no tag branding. They're now building their own power unit from scratch. And they're doing it under the name Red Bull Ford Powertrains. It's the most radical transformation in the team's 20-year existence. And the timing couldn't be more risky. 2026 is a reset across the board. New engines, new fuel, new chassis dimensions, active aerodynamics, a 50-50 power split between combustion and electricity. Every team is being forced to relearn the basics. But Red Bull? They chose this exact moment to go solo on the engine, to stop depending on Honda, and take complete control. Just as the technical complexity reaches its highest point in a decade. And they didn't just bet on themselves. They bet everything. Because if this engine doesn't work, there's no backup. And that's why some in the paddock are starting to ask, did Red Bull go too far? There's something unusual happening inside the Red Bull Powertrains facility. Not because it's new, but because it's quiet. Too quiet. According to insiders, there's been no leak. No sound bites. No photos. Just one statement from Ben Hodgkinson. We're taking this to the limit. Every possible limit. And now, it's starting to make sense. At the heart of the controversy is one line in the FIA's 2026 regulations. A number, 16:1. That's the maximum allowed compression ratio for every cylinder inside the V6 engine. Not 16.5, not 16.1, 16. Dead. But there's a catch. The FIA mandates that this compression must be measured at room temperature, not while the engine is hot, not while it's running, not while it's winning. And this is where things start to get uncomfortable, because Red Bull and reportedly Mercedes may have found a way to respect that rule, while extracting power far beyond what was intended. Here's how it works. When metal heats up, it expands. Different metals expand at different rates, by selecting materials that grow in very specific ways under heat. Red Bull's engineers may have created a dynamic combustion chamber, one that compresses more only when it counts. The idea is bold. Measure the engine cold. Keep it legal on paper. Then let physics do the rest once the race begins. Some call it brilliance. Others call it manipulation. But nobody's calling it illegal. At least not yet. Because as long as it passes scrutineering, the FIA has no grounds to intervene. And that's what has the rest of the grid worried. Ferrari, Audi, and Honda have all asked for clarification. But clarification is not regulation. And clarification doesn't come with penalties. Which means Red Bull could start the 2026 season with an engine that's technically legal and practically untouchable. But that's not the real issue. Because what matters isn't the number on the dyno. It's what that number allows Red Bull to do with the rest of the car. And that changes everything. So here's the twist. The FIA knows. They received a formal letter, signed by 3 of the biggest manufacturers in Formula One. Ferrari, Audi, Honda. They're not asking for sanctions. They're not accusing Red Bull directly. They're asking for one thing: clarification. Clarify how compression is being measured. Clarify how temperature affects legality. Clarify whether the current interpretation is fair or just convenient. But the FIA's answer? Silence. And behind that silence is something much more complicated, because the FIA is walking a tightrope. They just spent 3 years building these new regulations, pushing teams to invest, bringing in Ford, bringing in Audi, trying to look modern, clean, electric. Now imagine if, 3 months before the season opener, they admit the most innovative team might already be bending the rules. That's not just technical embarrassment, it's a political crisis. And this is where money starts creeping into the story. Ford has already committed over $500 million to this project. Red Bull has built a new engine facility, hired 600 people, pulled top talent out of Mercedes. This isn't a side project. It's a corporate restructure. If the FIA changes the interpretation now, they don't just hit Red Bull's engine. They hit the credibility of the entire 2026 reset. And this is the part nobody wants to say out loud. The FIA needs Red Bull to succeed, at least for now. Because if the most dominant team of the last 5 years suddenly collapses under the weight of its own ambition, that's not innovation failing. That's the regulations failing. And politically, they can't afford that. So instead, the rule stays vague. The testing stays cold. And the advantage, it stays protected. But here's the deeper issue. This isn't just about one engine, because what Red Bull has done might trigger a chain reaction across the entire grid. And that's where things start to fracture. Let's be clear. This isn't about compression ratios anymore. It's about something deeper. Something that no one on the record wants to explain. Because what Red Bull has just done sets a precedent. A legal gray zone validated by silence. And that opens the door for every other team to start playing the same game. If Mercedes and Red Bull are already engineering heat-based advantages, how long before Ferrari does the same? How long before Audi follows? And what happens when someone pushes one step too far? This is how scandals begin. Not with cheating, but with ambiguity. And here's the detail most fans missed. This isn't the first time we've seen this. Back in 2019, Ferrari's engines suddenly surged in performance. The paddock noticed. The telemetry didn't add up. And by the end of the season, the FIA stepped in. But the findings were never made public. They struck a private deal with Ferrari. No penalties. No statements, just a quiet handshake and a rewritten rulebook. The fallout poisoned the grid for 2 years. Now we're watching the same pattern, but with different players. This time, it's Red Bull. This time, it's Ford. And this time, the stakes are even higher, because there's another layer to this. The FIA isn't just regulating. They're managing reputations. They need Ford's comeback to work. They need Audi's debut to be credible. They need 2026 to feel clean, balanced, competitive, and most of all, they need control. But by refusing to act early, they may have already lost it. There's another silence we need to talk about. From within Red Bull itself, Adrian Newey is gone, Christian Horner gone, Helmut Marko silenced. This is a different team now, different leadership, different tone. And yet, the philosophy hasn't changed. Push the rules, test the boundaries, win at the edges of legality. What no one is saying publicly is that Red Bull is treating the FIA's silence as a green light. And if that's true, then the 2026 championship may already be decided, just not in the way fans expected. So what does all this mean? Let's start with the obvious. If Red Bull's engine really is operating at higher thermal efficiency, without breaking the rules, they may have solved the hardest problem of 2026, recovering lost combustion power. The V6 now delivers far less, just 400 kilowatts. The rest, nearly half of total output, comes from electric deployment, which means if your engine is underpowered, you're done. No amount of aerodynamic trickery can fix that. And here's where the advantage snowballs. Because if Red Bull starts the year with a 10 to 15 horsepower edge, even a small one, they can afford to shift their focus early. While others are still chasing reliability, Red Bull can develop drivability, smooth power delivery, battery integration, aerodynamic timing sync. It's not just about speed. It's about how early you unlock the system. And that's exactly what worries Ferrari. Because Ferrari doesn't just face a technical gap. They face a credibility problem. After the compression letter failed to generate any action, they're left with two options. 1. Copy the concept if they can. 2. Escalate the protest and risk being ignored again. Neither puts them in a strong position. Meanwhile, Mercedes sits in a very different place. They've been working on their 2026 unit longer than anyone. Their thermal systems are refined. Their cooling package is efficient. And if the rumors are correct, they're playing the same game as Red Bull, which leaves one question hanging over the paddock. Did Red Bull and Mercedes quietly align to shape the gray zone? If that's true, the midfield is in trouble. Audi, still adapting, still conservative. Honda at Aston Martin? Fast, yes, but not politically entrenched. Only two teams seem fully prepared to exploit the ambiguity, and that could split the grid in two. Now, Red Bull, they're facing something more complicated, because if they win, and the engine holds, this validates their entire powertrain project. The in-house structure, the Ford partnership, the money, all of it becomes a case study in doing the impossible. But if it fails, if the engine loses reliability, if the FIA tightens the rules mid-season, if performance drops suddenly, the collapse could be brutal. Not just for results, but for Verstappen's future. Because here's something no one is saying out loud. Max Verstappen didn't sign up to be a test driver. He's not here to help Red Bull become a constructor. He's here to win. And if this gamble costs him even one more title, especially after losing to Lando Norris by 2 points last year, his patience will wear thin. Fast. And all of that, every scenario, every risk, starts from one decision. Not the compression ratio, but the FIA's silence about it. So here's where we are. Red Bull may have built the most controversial power unit of the new era. A machine that, by design, lives in the gray space between regulation and innovation. The FIA knows. The teams suspect it. And the advantage, if it holds, could reshape the first half of 2026. But none of this is confirmed. No team will speak openly. No protest has been formalized. And the FIA? Still silent, which leaves the entire paddock in a kind of cold war. Everyone watching. Everyone calculating. No one blinking. And now, there's a bigger risk forming. Not just for Red Bull, but for Formula One itself. Because if this season becomes a story of loopholes, of interpretation battles and late clarifications, the technical narrative could collapse. What was meant to be a reset could become a repeat. And here's what most fans haven't realized yet. This engine isn't frozen. The FIA can still intervene. They can still change the measurement protocol. They can still force manufacturers to re-homologate. And if that happens mid-season, just like Ferrari in 2019, it could destroy everything Red Bull has built. The political pressure is growing. Ferrari is waiting. Audi is watching. Mercedes is too quiet. And if Verstappen finds himself losing time on straights by race 5, with no clear explanation, the explosion will come from inside the team. Because all of this entire gamble, hinges on one thing holding together: trust in the design, in the data, in the silence. And if that cracks, this might not be a story about a clever engine. It might be the opening chapter of a full-blown investigation, one that could pull the FIA straight into the center. And this might only be the beginning.